October has always felt different. The air turns colder, the nights grow longer, and even the quietest neighborhoods start to feel like they're holding their breath. It's the month when the wind whispers through half-dead trees, when the world smells faintly of smoke and damp leaves, and when, for some reason, the line between the living and the dead feels thinner. Maybe that's just superstition, or maybe it's the kind of truth that only makes sense to people who've seen what hides in the dark. Every October, I hear people talk about spooky stories, haunted houses, creepy neighbors, strange noises in the night, but most of those are fiction. The kind of stories you tell around a campfire to make your friends shiver. But what I'm about to share with you, those weren't just stories. They happened. They happened to people who never expected anything bad to happen in the first place. People who were just trying to get through another day, who didn't realize October had other plans for them. Each of these stories begins in an ordinary place. A store closing after hours. A group of kids playing outside before dinner. A couple driving into the countryside for a quiet day together. There's nothing strange about any of that until something small, something almost unnoticeable, shifts the air around them, until they realize that someone else is there, someone who shouldn't be. The thing about October is that it doesn't need ghosts to be terrifying. Sometimes, it's the people hiding behind masks, the ones who wait in the dark corners of parking lots or under the piles of leaves we used to jump in as kids. Sometimes, it's the kind of fear that wears a smile, the kind that feels human, but isn't. So tonight, while you're listening, lock your doors, close your windows, and remember, every person you'll hear about in the next few minutes swore their stories were real. And the strange part? They all happened during October. Maybe there's something about this month that wakes up whatever's been sleeping all year long. Or maybe October just gives those things permission to walk among us again. These are 3 true scary October stories. Tales of people who met something, or someone, they couldn't quite explain. And if you ever find yourself working late, walking home in the dark, or passing by an old field where the trees don't move even when the wind blows, you might want to keep listening, because it always starts the same way. Normal, harmless, almost boring, right before everything changes forever. Back in 2016, I picked up a seasonal job at Party City during October. It was supposed to be easy money before Halloween, restocking shelves, organizing costumes, and cleaning up the mess after the evening rush. I didn't mind the late shifts. I was in college back then, didn't have morning classes, and honestly, I liked the quiet. But that October night changed the way I felt about being alone in a store after closing forever. We stayed open until 11 during Halloween season, which meant I usually worked from 5 to close. Things were chaotic until around 9. Then the crowd thinned out, and after 10, the store felt empty. That weird, hollow quiet that only comes when the air conditioning hums louder than your own thoughts. That night, there were just 4 of us left. Maria, who was working the register, Kyle, who was restocking shelves, Ashley, our supervisor, and me. I'd been assigned to costume duty, running back and forth between the floor and the storage rooms to grab whatever customers asked for. After the crowd died down, Ashley asked me to start cleaning and moving boxes from the basement back up to the costume room. That was the part I hated most. The basement. It wasn't creepy by design, just low ceilings, concrete walls, and shelves stacked with masks, wigs, and boxes labeled with faded black marker. Still, something about it always felt off. Around 10:30, after several trips up and down the stairs, I decided to take a short break. My legs were killing me. When I finally went back down, I noticed the lights in the basement were off. Someone must have switched them off without realizing I was still working there. I flipped them back on, heard that faint electric hum, and started lifting a box of girls' costumes. That's when I heard a soft clatter, like something falling to the floor on the other side of the basement. At first, I thought it was just one of the boxes toppling over. But then, from the narrow gap between the shelves, I caught a glimpse of something white movement, slow and deliberate. I leaned to the side, just enough to peek around the metal shelf, and froze. Someone was standing there, dressed head to toe in a white hooded robe, with a full face mask. It wasn't a silly party mask either. It looked like one of those cheap latex horror masks with bulging eyes and a mouth that hung open unnaturally. I laughed nervously. "You got me," I said, trying to sound casual. For a second, I thought it was Kyle or maybe Ashley pulling a late-night Halloween prank. But the person didn't respond. They just tilted their head, slow, to one side. It wasn't playful. It was wrong, like an animal trying to understand what it's looking at. I took a cautious step forward, ready to call them out, maybe pull the mask off and end the joke. But when I got closer, something made me stop. The boots. Heavy, scuffed work boots, the kind Kyle never wore. And then it hit me. This person was too tall to be Ashley, too broad to be Maria. And Kyle? He'd been in another aisle just minutes ago. A chill crept up my spine. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I slowly backed up the stairs, not wanting to show fear, not wanting to make a sound. When I reached the door at the top, I closed it gently and went straight to Ashley. She was talking to Maria at the register. "Where's Kyle?" I asked, trying not to sound panicked. "Right here," Kyle's voice called from a nearby aisle. That's when my stomach dropped. I turned to Ashley. "There's someone in the basement, dressed in a white robe, wearing a mask." Her face went pale. She grabbed her keys and motioned for Kyle to come with us. We went back to the basement together. And of course, just like in every cliché horror movie, whoever had been down there was gone. Every box was still in place. The shelves were untouched. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. There was a back door upstairs for truck deliveries. Ashley checked it, but it was locked from the inside. She pulled up the security feed from the last hour. Nothing. No one on camera except me. There weren't any cameras inside the basement or the costume room itself. It was like whoever that was had appeared out of thin air. Ashley tried to calm me down, said it was probably a prank from a customer or a leftover display prop someone had moved. But I knew what I saw. The way that mask had turned, the way it watched me. Still, I had a job to do. So against every bit of my better judgment, I went back down there alone. The silence was worse this time. Even the hum of the lights seemed quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I lifted the same box again, trying to focus, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Then I heard the faint crinkle of a plastic bag, somewhere deeper in the shadows. That was enough. I carried the box up the stairs, set it down in the costume room, and walked back toward the basement door to turn off the light. But before flipping the switch, I looked down the stairs one last time, and there he was. The man in the white robe, standing at the bottom, looking up. Only this time, the mask was gone. I saw his face. Pale, grinning, his eyes wide open and fixed on me. That smile wasn't playful. It was stretched frozen, like he'd been waiting for me to look. I slammed the door shut so hard it rattled the hinges, ran to the others, shouting for help. Ashley and Kyle rushed over. But by the time we got there, the basement door was open again. So was the back exit. Whoever that man was, he was gone. The security camera outside didn't catch him leaving. I don't know if he was just some lunatic hiding out, a thief, or something worse. But to this day, whenever I pass a party city around Halloween, I can't help but glance at the back door, half expecting to see that same pale face watching from the dark, smiling like he never left. October was always my favorite time of year growing up. The air smelled like wood smoke and cold dirt, and every evening, the setting sun painted our street in orange light that felt almost magical. I lived in a small suburban neighborhood back then, the kind where kids rode bikes until dinner and no one ever locked their doors. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened, old enough to feel fearless, young enough to still think monsters only existed in movies. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween. My friends Liam and Billy came over after school to help rake the leaves in my yard. We turned it into a game, piling them into a mountain, diving into it, wrestling, laughing until our sides hurt. It was the kind of innocent chaos only kids understand. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, The air was colder and the wind started to pick up, carrying the sound of dry leaves scraping across the pavement. We decided to go inside, grab some snacks, and play video games for a while. But after an hour or so, Billy looked out the window and said, "Let's go back out one last match before it gets too cold." He meant our triple threat wrestling match in the leaves. We'd been obsessed with WWE back then, pretending we were our favorite wrestlers and using the leaf pile as our ring. My parents didn't mind, and the corner of our yard was far enough from the main street that we could be as loud as we wanted. When we went back outside, it was almost completely dark, but a streetlight at the end of the cul-de-sac gave off just enough light to see the yard. The pile looked smaller, scattered, like the wind had blown half of it away. We started raking it back together, but then Liam stopped and said, "Hey, what's that?" He was pointing at a lumpy section of the pile, longer and oddly shaped, almost like something buried underneath. At first, I thought it was just a big branch, but when Liam poked at it with the rake, the leaves sank in, and there was a soft, hollow sound like hitting something solid. Billy crouched down, started brushing away leaves, and froze. "There's something under here," he said quietly. I remember the way his voice changed from playful to serious in a heartbeat. We gathered around him, brushing more leaves aside until we saw a hand, or what looked like one, pale plastic-looking fingers poking out from the leaves. For a second, my stomach turned to ice. Then we realized it wasn't real. It was a fake body, a mannequin or some kind of Halloween prop, lying there face down under the pile. We started laughing, that shaky kind of laugh you do when you're scared, but trying not to admit it. "Who put this here?" Liam said. "Your dad?" But before I could answer, a voice came from behind us. "Gotcha!" We spun around. A man stepped out from the bushes near the edge of the yard, laughing, his teeth crooked and yellow in the streetlight. He looked way too old to be pulling a prank, maybe 60, with thin gray hair, sunken cheeks, and eyes that seemed too wide, like he never blinked. "Scared you, didn't I?" he said, wheezing through his laugh. "Been watching you kids play out here every day. Thought I'd have a little fun." The way he said "been watching you kids" made my skin crawl. Liam tried to laugh it off, saying, "Good one, mister," but I could tell he was just as freaked out as I was. I grabbed the rake and whispered, "Let's go inside." We walked back to my house quickly, pretending not to hear the man calling after us, still laughing. Inside, I told my dad. He didn't hesitate. He went outside right away. But by the time he got there, the man and the fake body were gone. Dad checked the bushes, the sidewalk, even the dead-end street nearby. But it was empty. Probably some weirdo trying to scare kids, he said. "Don't go near him again." That night, we stayed up late playing games, but I couldn't shake that man's face from my mind, those bulging eyes, that grin. Eventually, my friends left, and I went to my room. I left my window cracked open to let the cool air in. My bed was right next to it, and I could hear the wind blowing through the trees outside. Sometime around midnight, I heard a voice, quiet but close. "Hey, kid." I sat up instantly, my heart pounding. I looked toward the window, but the curtains were barely moving. "Hey, it's me," the voice said again. "Didn't mean to scare you earlier." The tone was friendly, almost apologetic, but I recognized it right away. That man. I froze, too afraid to move or speak. Then, slowly, his face appeared in the gap of the curtain. The same wide eyes, the same crooked teeth. He smiled and in a hoarse whisper said, "I live across the street. I like watching you kids play." When his hand reached under the window frame, trying to push it open further, I finally found my voice and screamed for my dad. The man jerked back, but not before his fingers clawed at the windowsill, trying to pull himself up. I ran down the hall, yelling for help, and my dad jumped out of bed. When he came back to my room, the window was open wider, the curtains fluttering, but the man was gone. We could see his house from my window, a small, dirty-looking place at the end of the cul-de-sac. Lights off, front yard overgrown. My dad grabbed his jacket and stormed across the street. He banged on the door, shouting for the man to come out, but no one answered. So he called the cops. When the police arrived, they knocked again, and this time, the man opened the door. Even from across the street, I could smell something sour, chemical like burnt plastic. One of the officers whispered something to my dad, and later my dad told me they thought the man was on meth. I remember peeking past my dad's arm and seeing the inside of the house, piles of trash, stained walls, a couch covered in old blankets. It didn't look like anyone actually lived there. The police told him to stay away from us and made a report, but they didn't arrest him. After that night, we never saw him again. The house went dark, and eventually, a for sale sign appeared on the lawn. But even years later, whenever I hear the rustle of dry leaves outside my window, I think about that man crouched somewhere in the dark, watching, waiting for the right moment to step out and say, "Gotcha." It happened last October, the kind of month that tricks you into thinking the world's still safe. I had been talking to this girl I met at a party, Nikki. We'd been hanging out once a week, nothing serious, just that strange space between flirting and something real. She was the kind of person who loved October for all the right reasons. Pumpkin patches, haunted houses, apple picking, the little cliches that make the season feel alive. So when she mentioned wanting to do something fall-themed, I suggested we go apple picking. She lit up at the idea. So we found a place about 30 minutes out of town, far enough that the drive would be quiet and scenic. It was one of those crisp afternoons where the sky looks like painted glass, the sun slipping lower with every mile. The roads grew narrower, the trees taller, the houses farther apart. By the time we left the main road, we were surrounded by nothing but open fields and stretches of dark forest. We passed what looked like an old orchard on the way rows of apple trees, a tiny wooden house, a broken sign that didn't even have a name on it. There were no cars in the gravel lot, no people, no signs of activity. Nikki said it looked abandoned, and I agreed. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, turned onto the dirt road, and parked near the fence. The place had an unsettling, quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. The trees stood still, even though the wind was moving. The house had peeling paint, one window cracked, and the front porch sagging under its own weight. It didn't feel like anyone had been there for years. Nikki tugged on my arm and said she didn't like it, so we got back in the car and kept driving to the official orchard we'd planned to visit. When we got there, it was closed, a "See you next season" sign hanging on the stand. Nikki laughed and said maybe we should have just stayed at the first one. I joked that we still could. She hesitated, but eventually I convinced her. "We'll just pick a few apples and leave," I said. "No one's even around to care." We drove back and parked again, a little farther off the dirt road this time, half hidden by the trees. We had to hop a small wooden fence, the kind you could easily step over. The air was cooler under the trees, thick with that sweet, earthy smell of rotting fruit. Our shoes crunched over fallen apples, soft and mushy underfoot. At first it was fun. We joked around, filled the bags we'd brought, took a few pictures. I tossed an apple high into the air, pretending I was going to throw it at her, and she screamed and ran laughing. She cut through the trees, disappearing between the rows. I chased after her for a few seconds, but when I reached the next row, she wasn't there. "Nikki," I called out, still smiling. "Come on, I'm sorry." Her voice came back faintly from somewhere nearby, saying she was picking her own apples, but it sounded different, like she was farther away than she should have been. I kept walking, brushing through branches, trying to follow her voice. Then an apple hit the ground right in front of me. I froze. Another one dropped closer this time. "Very funny," I said, thinking she was messing with me. But then another apple came, from the opposite side. That's when I realized there were at least 2 directions those could have come from. I stepped through to the next row, and that's when I saw him. A man maybe late teens, early 20s, standing 5 trees away, right in the middle of the row. He was tall, with shoulder-length black hair, and clothes that looked a little too old and worn, like he hadn't changed in weeks. His face was half in shadow, but I could see the faint smirk pulling at his mouth. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I stepped backward, pushing between the trees, trying not to take my eyes off him. I squeezed through another row, then another, my heartbeat getting louder than my footsteps. My phone started vibrating in my pocket, It was Nikki. I answered in a whisper, and she was crying. "There's a man following me," she said. "He's just walking behind me, not saying anything. He looks like he wants to hurt me." My chest went cold. "I see him," I said. "Just get back to the car, now." I started running, pushing through the trees, branches scraping against my arms. I didn't even care if I was loud anymore. The air felt heavier, like the whole orchard was pressing in around us. I broke out of the rows and saw Nikki standing by the car, shaking, eyes wide. Before I could reach her, she pointed past me. "He's there," she whispered. I turned and saw him again, the same man half hidden behind a tree, one arm and part of his face visible in the dying light. He was watching us. That smirk was still there, just barely visible through the leaves. I didn't think. I just jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and floored it. The wheels spun on the dirt for a second before catching. We tore down the road, passing that rotting farmhouse, the old fence, the broken sign. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. Nikki was crying, asking me what that guy was doing there. I didn't have an answer. A few miles later, we spotted a fruit stand on the side of the road, run by two older women. I pulled over just to feel like we were back in the real world again. Nikki went to get some water while I tried to explain what happened to the women at the stand. When I mentioned the orchard, both of them stopped what they were doing and looked at each other. "You didn't go in there, did you?" one of them asked. I nodded. She sighed, then told me something that made my stomach twist. Years ago, the owner's son had murdered his girlfriend and buried her near that orchard. The police found her body in the woods behind it, but the son disappeared before they could arrest him. The father still technically owned the property, but he hadn't lived there since. "No one goes near that place anymore," she said. "It's cursed ground." I remember staring at her, realizing what she was saying. The young man we saw the same age as the missing son, same hair, same build. Nikki started crying again, saying she felt him watching us even after we left. We never went to the police. I don't know why. Maybe we didn't want to sound crazy. Maybe part of me didn't want to believe what we saw. But every time I think back to that moment, that half-hidden face staring at us through the trees, I can still feel that same heavy silence. The kind of silence that means someone else is there, even when you can't see them. And sometimes, when I drive past that road at night, I still look down that dirt path just for a second. The house is gone now, but the trees are still there, lined up perfectly, unmoving, like they're waiting, like he never left. So, 3 stories, all set in October. 3 ordinary nights that could have been anyone's. A store shift, a backyard game, a short road trip. Nothing special until something stepped out of the dark and reminded them that safety is mostly an illusion. That's what October does best. It wraps fear in familiarity. It hides the strange behind the sound of the wind or the smile of a stranger. And if these stories teach anything, it's that the scariest things aren't the monsters we imagine. They're the people we almost didn't notice. When you leave here tonight, maybe you'll check the basement light before you close the door. Maybe you'll look twice at the pile of leaves on your lawn, or think twice before turning down an empty dirt road that seems too quiet. The world doesn't always wait for Halloween to get dark. If you've lived through something like this, a night that still wakes you up, a moment that felt wrong in a way you can't explain, tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if you want more true stories like these, stay with the channel, because October isn't over yet, and the next one might be closer to home than you think.